Hiya, good morning. My name's Luke from Equilibrium Risk, and welcome to our Sustainability for Manufacturers webinar with SustainableX. Firstly, I need to apologise because this recording at the beginning of the webinar is being recorded later on because I forgot to press record at the right time on the webinar itself. So my name's Luke from Equilibrium Risk, and later on you'll also see Rondi and Nick from SustainableX. So let's get straight into it. So firstly, thank you for attending the webinar and watching it. I know that you're all really busy, so we really do appreciate you being here and watching the webinar. We have spent a lot of time putting this presentation together to ensure that your time is well spent and you get the most out of this as possible. As I mentioned on the webinar itself, there are a few housekeeping problems, but I won't go through this now as a later recording. So who is Equilibrium Risk? Well, we are specialists in security management, and our aim is to provide a secure environment for a manufacturer to operate and grow. We promise to be able to improve a manufacturer's security while at the same time saving them time and money. And what drives us on is we believe that no business, no manufacturer should suffer any form of security incident. So why security and sustainability? Well, let's start with this. The world cannot have security without sustainability, nor can have sustainability without security. There are widespread and costly fears about cybersecurity. There are actions by terrorist organizations and violent lone wolves. We have economic instability and rising inequality and a devastating pandemic. The basics of good security is understanding what the problems are or could be, mitigating those problems, and planning for when or if those things go wrong. We've seen the failure of these basic steps in the tsunami in Fukushima and more recently with the coronavirus pandemic. A long-term transition to sustainability is clearly underway, but only at the early stages. And arguably the progress that has been made is still being offset and even outmatched by worsening climate change and environmental damage that threatens the security and well-being of people and nations. The goals of security and sustainability have increasingly become more important over recent years, and important overlaps are beginning to be seen. So without further ado, or over-egging this pudding, let me hand you over to Nick and Rondi. There we go.
Excellent. So just on what we're going to cover today, we're going to look at what sustainability means for manufacturers in what's the breadth and depth of it, and why, what's the business case for doing more and to paying more attention to it. And then to put a bit of depth on what are the major impact areas affecting manufacturers specifically, and just a few real examples of risks that are actually occurring now and people are seeing.
So what is sustainability, especially for manufacturers? And there isn't a single common definition of sustainable manufacturing, but the OECD sums it up like this: as the creation of manufactured products through economically sound business processes that minimize negative impacts, environmental impacts, while conserving energy and natural resources. So it is sustainable manufacturing. It's minimizing environmental harm. It's considering the full life of the cycle of a product, starting with sustainable procurement, all the raw materials, ability of parts to be recycled and used at other ends of their lives. And basically, it's good business sense.
So just given some real context to it about who cares and why they care and how it impacts you, the big one we see for manufacturers is customers. And a number of manufacturers we work with have had a major customer come to them and say, what are you doing on sustainability? We're now looking at our impacts. What are your product impacts and what are your process impacts? And they need to be able to answer those questions to sustain the relationship. So that is a big pressure. Employees, increasingly, we had one business that went to a careers fair. It's quite a high-tech manufacturer, and they were dealing with graduates, and they were very unnerved in this virtual careers fair because they were asking them questions about their carbon footprint and their sustainability and their diversity and what they do for inclusion, and they didn't have the answers, and that triggered them to say, we got to do more. Your local communities can be quite active, and they're such a key part of your business in terms of providing employees and all the permits and everything that goes with it. So they do care about what you're doing, and you do care about them. So increasingly, as this goes up the agenda, they need attention. And regulation keeps coming. There's plastic taxes on its way. There's going to be some sort of carbon reporting that's mandated in the not too distant future for everyone. Depending on your size, you might already have that. And there's lots of other legislation associated with this agenda that we'll mention in passing. And consumer action groups can have a big hit. Just look at plastic straws that we'll run to talk about later. Wow, if you were manufacturing straws when that storm kicked off, that would have been a bit of a hit. So just some stats about why people that we're working with decide actually we're going to do more, we are going to be a bit more progressive with this. And we were quite surprised. We did some primary research, and the biggest driver for it was actually reputation. They want that reputation and trust factor of being a sustainable business. We thought the biggest driver would be cost efficiencies, actually, and it's up there. You can see there's a number of key drivers, and we always say if it's costing you money, sustainability, you're doing it wrong. It should be making you more profitable. And the employee piece is increasingly a big deal. And if you look at anyone under 40 pretty much now is a millennial, and beyond that, Generation Z, these guys really care, and they've been shown to not only, but they will give as much consideration to the ethics and sustainability of a business as they do to the remuneration package. So that's quite a big shift from years gone by. And there are a bunch of people who just think, well, I can see the writing on the wall. I'm going to have to do this, so I may as well get on with it. And those are the big drivers. There is a smaller group who actually look in their sector and think there's an opportunity for us to stand out from the crowd here. So we're going to use this to drive competitive advantage. And then there's a cynical bunch, and we don't really mind whatever your reasons for doing it, as long as you genuinely become more sustainable. If it's a pure PR thing, well, great. You're still having a better impact on the world. So let's go. So when we look at business cases, and that's always the first thing we do with companies, is why would you be more sustainable? Why does it make sense for you? And these are the big areas. So there is that customer piece, and then you look at cost efficiencies, employee retention, competitive advantage, and risk reductions. For some businesses, the whole risk reduction and compliance is the sole business case for doing it. But we won't go through all of them. If we just pick out customer retention and acquisition and just really briefly highlight what it is for manufacturers in that space. So as well as your customers starting to care more and put pressure on, which may come from financial drivers in particular, because lots of investors now will only fund businesses that have sound environmental, social and governance credentials. So that is a big push, and things tend to follow the money. But in the wider world, that consumer pressure to be more sustainable is filtering its way through every supply chain. And that stat was 2018. If anything, that'll be a much higher number now. And when you look at why manufacturers have chosen to work with us, that customer pressure is the biggest thing. And there's some stats that will pop up here that relate to what the cost of acquisition of customers might be, but the cost of retention as well. And for manufacturers, they tend not to have so many customers, but if one of your big customers turns around and asks you what your sustainability credentials are and don't like the answer, the consequences of that are potentially catastrophic. So that is a big deal. But the issue, the subject, if you're doing something positive around it, we've had a number of clients who've actually got some new business and significant new business because they've been doing interesting things and communicating it in a nice way that gets a bit of attention. And in one case in particular, an international client has come to them and really enabled them to accelerate their business internationally, because they're the only people who are talking the right language about their carbon footprint of their process and their product, which fits completely with this business's agenda. So savings on retaining customers, massive. Potential profit, as well as customer acquisition costs for new business.
So what is sustainability? And it's a massive topic, and it's really broad. And obviously, I think everybody thinks of sustainability as environmental as a first starter, and that's one part of the agenda. Why it's particularly important, the whole agenda for manufacturers, is it's a huge employer in the UK, generating 2.7 million jobs, 8% of the workforce. So good employment is a key aspect of sustainability, which includes well-being, diversity, inclusion, education, all those nice things. But also it has significant impact in the supply chain for carbon intensity. So carbon, as we said, the environmental side, FMCG supply chains represent somewhere between 80 and 90% of all the carbon, embodied carbon globally. So this obviously includes impact on manufacturers and what manufacturers are doing. So this topic is very, very broad. And yeah, an impending example, and of course the compliance and economic side of being more sustainable is more efficient, lots of innovation, and governance is going to be an area. Manufacturers are huge employers, huge impacts for sustainability, therefore the government will focus on them in a big way in terms of regulating and putting more compliance in.
So we always suggest, in terms of a starting point with businesses, you need to know where you are, and it is such a broad church that it makes sense to apply a framework to it. And we use a number of frameworks depending on the businesses we work with. This is our own, and it's a bit shorter than some of the other ones, so it makes more sense to go through. But it gives you an idea of the breadth of the issues. So environmental impact's the obvious one. Most people think sustainability, environmental impact. But actually, if you look at some of the UN definitions of it, the UK government's definitions of it, it's so much broader. And employee well-being, particularly through COVID, has really gone up people's radars in terms of looking both after the physical health, the health and safety, and the mental well-being too. We've already touched on the equality, diversity. It is a massive part of this agenda, and many businesses we're speaking to haven't really started with this. They don't understand what their diversity is. They don't understand what the diversity of their community is, their customers, and when they're asked the question, they're really woolly. So it's quite a big risk area if you're not getting to grips with it. And then the ethics and governance, and that's where the financial guys really look. They want to make sure that there's no skeletons in your closet, and that you are ethically looking at your supply chains and making the right decisions that's not putting their money at risk of reputational tarnish.
Yeah, so supply chains, bad things happen in international supply chains, especially, not alone, but bad things can happen in local supply chains as well. But supply chain and understanding sustainability all along the chain is where you can really make a difference. That's all about collaboration. A huge part of the UN Sustainable Development Goals is partnerships, because you cannot move the dial on sustainability or sustainable achievement without partnering with other people to do that, whether that's in your supply chain or not. Innovation and digitalization is a key role. It drives efficiencies, it's driving better products. It's definitely a one-way street. We talk a lot about value to customers, because we're all about business, and we come from a business background, so we're about making sure that whatever you're doing has a business case, you're doing the right thing for your business, as well as achieving these great sustainability targets and goals. And community contribution, it's about what you're doing to give back to the community, whether that's in jobs or charity work or products, but also what you're taking from the community and making sure you're not polluting, and you're taking local people to work for you and working with local businesses and startups. So it's a huge umbrella of topics, but it's a really nice way to frame all the great things that businesses are doing already and target those opportunities going forward. So in terms of what we wanted to talk about today is really focusing on impact areas and where the big pushes are for, especially in manufacturing. And I always like to say sometimes we go into clients and they tell us they're recycling their plastic bottles or they got unbleached toilet paper. And I think that's definitely things to be cognizant of or aware of. But in terms of where you can really shift the dial, if you're a manufacturing company with really energy inefficient plant and leaving all your lights on all day and all night, unbleached toilet paper is not your most massive impact on sustainability or even carbon. So in terms of typical areas that manufacturers or you would see about, I mean, carbon footprint is absolutely, if you're going to be serious about sustainability, carbon footprint is a baseline, and it is not going away. It's everywhere you look. So a big impact is a big thing to think about. Typically is carbon footprint, employment, apprenticeships, kickstarts. All those things are really fundamental in terms of bringing people out of poverty and educating and providing better outcomes for our community members. Waste reduction, all the waste, time, waiting, product waste, inefficiency, really important sustainable topics that manufacturers would already be working on. And innovation is obviously supported by the government. R&D tax credits have been around for a long time. Definitely supported. But what we're going to do today is kind of turn that on its head to have a little bit deeper, a bit more creative thinking, and focus on, in terms of manufacturing impact areas, the inputs, the operations and your products. So we a bit quick fire, and don't worry about taking notes or anything like that. We will issue a summary document at the end. So yeah, there's quite a lot of content here, but it's just to sort of get your creative juices thinking and thinking about the whole sustainability agenda with a different lens.
So from inputs, it starts with, and again, somewhere we're seeing really, and even in the last month, we've seen way more activity on customers asking manufacturers about the recycled content of their input materials as well as their product itself, which can be quite challenging for tooling implications. There's all sorts of consequences of that. So if you haven't been asked already, really is likely to be a question that you're going to get in the future, and trying to maximize that recycled element, or certainly making sure there's no damage done in the virgin materials you produce. But they also ask a lot of questions, and you look at the multinationals, slave labor is a massive agenda for them across their supply chain. So it doesn't matter where you are, they want evidence that you haven't got that issue in there. And if you've got an overseas production facility, they'd very much like to see that audited and proven through worker interviews. So income and packaging, big area. Plastic tax got big potential consequences for it. There's shipping costs go with that, but that has to be balanced with not having your incoming products and raw materials damaged in any way. So if you're not already looking at it, that is a big area for innovation in terms of, can that be reused, recycled, or can it be, has it got additional value? Can you use it in a different process? There has been quite a lot of innovation in that area, and it's a good opportunity. Restricted substances, again, when you look at those multinationals, they're asking all the questions around that, and they want audit evidence that you haven't got any conflict minerals or products like that, substances like that in your supply chain. And they want to know about the ethics of your suppliers, both their direct ones on your tier 2 and tier 3. They really want to get into some depth, because particularly their funders don't want any of these skeletons coming out. So they want people to do as much as possible. So it just passes down the chain. So again, if you haven't been asked around that, you're likely to be asked. And there are a number of bodies like SEDEX and the Responsible Business Alliance. There are a number of processes and code of conduct that you can get people to sign up to that starts to satisfy those demands. And then they also are getting big on not using virgin materials, particularly plastics, but also things like cotton. Anything that's water intensive or resource intensive, they don't like that. Palm oil, classic example, in terms of not being a fantastically renewable product from the perspective of rainforest being chopped down, deforestation. There's loads of issues around where are your source materials coming from.
So in terms of operations, things to really consider is all your intensity, energy intensity, renewable energy. What do you use? We always encourage our clients to understand where the energy sources are coming from, baseline it, track it, because as soon as you start measuring these things, you can see them go down, and you manage it. Yeah, waste management in terms of operation. I think this is something that manufacturers are all over, because they obviously apply lean principles or Six Sigma to really focus on their waste. But one thing to consider that I think we find a lot is if you have got physical waste and it's leaving your premises, where does it go? And do you understand where it goes? Is it going to landfill? Is it being burned? Is it being recycled and separated? So these are some of the more detailed questions as you get to scratch the surface about what people are asking for. Efficiency, is continuous improvement a constant theme in your business? A really good question, just to make sure it is. Along with sustainability, actually, it should be something that's embedded in the processes rather than another layer on top. We've talked a bit about workforces, but why it's so important is that good employment is a real lever in sustainability. Good employment and training ensures better outcomes and reduction of poverty. So the government has got targets and guidelines to reduce these things, but they can't do them alone, and they will be expecting to have, I'm expecting that there'll be some more workforce and employee targets coming down the pipe, because they've signed up to the UN Sustainable Goals for 2030. So yeah, they'll need businesses to support them. We talked a bit about diversity already, and how diverse are you, but it also includes inclusion. And what are you doing is your operation really an inclusive operation? And do you know about any disabilities or issues in your employees? And we had a great example the other day of somebody in a warehouse operation never went for a promotion, and nobody understood that he had a hearing. He was hard of hearing and knew he had to use the phone a lot. So just thought if he was a more senior member of staff, and nobody knew that, and could have adapted. So, there's lots of things there that you can really support great opportunities within your workforce, if you know about them. In terms of community involvement, most companies we come across take a huge amount of pride in what they do for the community. There's a lot of give backs in terms of charity work, or giving their time, or supporting initiatives. And the sustainability framework's a really nice way to put this all together in an umbrella, and it's a nice way to talk about it, because it is something that's really important to be part of the community. And land use, so you're maximising your land use. Is there any opportunity for more renewables on site, whether it's solar panels or whatever you can do? So yeah, really just looking at your operations through a different lens is a nice thing to do for sustainability.
So looking at the products, your end product itself, again, a big push. We talked about the incoming materials and the recycled content within that, not using virgin materials. But the other end of this is actually making it recyclable, and what happens to it at its end of life, and thinking that through. Packaging, we talked about inbound packaging, so same thing going out as well. And again, we've seen some really innovative stuff in terms of people changing how they package it, so the packaging becomes useful to the customer in some way, either as part of the product, or it can be used for another purpose. So there's lots of innovation in that space as well. But then how do you get it out the door to that end user, to that customer? How is that delivered? Batch size. Ronnie's got a good example of this, actually, haven't you?
Oh no, I just there was a Twitter storm a little while ago about Amazon delivering carrot seeds, 5 packets of carrot seeds in 5 massive boxes to a customer, and it was all over Twitter. And these sort of things, somebody's just not thought logically about it. Yeah, they could have been sent in an envelope, I think. So
but
just watch.
Since we started working with manufacturers, actually we've got the phrase shipping air stuck in our heads in terms of optimizing both inbound and outbound. Let's not be moving air, really try and concentrate things, and people have changed how the product's delivered quite significantly to stop shipping air. Oh,
and also the logistics providers you use, you know, do they have any sustainability credentials? Are they transitioning their fleet to electric, or even cycle? You know, we're dealing with a few clients in London who can cycle their products around the city. So yeah, really good stuff.
So end of life is again something that's historically been quite neglected, and we talk about the recyclable. It's all right making it recyclable, but actually how do you get that circularity going? And some customers are now saying to people, what is that end of life process? Do you have a take back scheme? We need you to have a take back scheme. So that's got massive implications clearly for people. And then education on how people use your product for maximum effect to extend its life cycle, because that has big sustainability consequences. If every product life is a bit longer, that's a great thing. But also in use, if depending on what the nature of your product is, can it reduce carbon impact? Can it encourage good behaviors? And this all contributes to an innovation cycle. So it's really important that the framework you establish lets you capture innovation. And when we do our workshops, actually that provides that sustainability lens, triggers innovation ideas literally in the room. You can see it happening, and to have that consistent approach and consistent review, and making sure that if people have innovation ideas, they're listened to and they get the feedback. Without the feedback, the innovation gets stifled. So that's a key element. So risks in the real world and what we see. So the first thing is that there's obviously a Deming cycle for risk, but the biggest thing to do is not ignore this. It's not going anywhere. You will have to deal with some of these issues. With COP26, carbon in particular is big on everybody's agenda. Well, that's September. After that, guess what? Some of the other ideas are going to be coming through, because we are committed as a nation to achieving some of these goals with international agreements. So you do need to get to grips with it in some way.
I think sometimes we talk to clients as well, and they are really got their head in the sand, and they don't really want to start addressing sustainability because it's just a bit too big. And or is it too big? And we always say just start, because you don't know that it's not too big until you start the process. So yeah, very much a good picture from some of our discussions.
So the biggest thing is just understand it. Apply a framework, doesn't matter what framework, but apply it to give you that structured thought, and then go through a classic risk management process where what's the probability of that impacting your business and what are the consequences of that happening, and then just pick your big risks. And that's where to start if you're looking at this from a compliance and a risk perspective, and looking at it from Luke's perspective on the security side of things is as good a place to start as anywhere, because that's firmly in the governance box. It starts with, if you don't have good governance and controls to manage this process and assess what your risks are and what your opportunities are, you aren't really going to move with it. So just doing a quick deep dive on specific issues, if we looked at a few examples of risk specifically for manufacturers, climate action risk assessment is one of the big drivers for everybody. So how is climate change potentially going to affect your business? And you need to run scenarios. You need to look at extreme temperatures. You need to look at extreme rainfall events and apply it to your business and your supply chain. So just looking at weather changes for manufacturers, typically flood. I mean, today's I don't know where it is where you are, but here the risk of flash flood is quite significant. What would that do? You've got rainfall events which are much more intense now. So the way things were set up often doesn't cope. Is the risk of damage to goods, etc. And then there's knock-on effects. If you had a fire and there was the fire brigade come in and lots of water sprayed around and there's lots of runoff, is that potentially going into a water course? Because there's unlimited fines potentially now on pollution events from the Environment Agency, as well as just the sheer harm that's produced. So have you looked at your drainage systems? Have you got controls and stops and measures and good plans in place? And if you're in a water stressed area, what's your water consumption, and how would you deal with drought? And we've been quite lucky recently. There hasn't been any hose pipe bans, etc. But it's not beyond the bounds of possibility that I'll return to the UK. But this is again where supply chain kicks in, because if in your supply chain some of your key plant is in a water stressed area, there is the risk that they run out and their production capacity is hit. And there is a live example with that. The global shortage of chips is driven by a lot of things, but one of the factors has been in Taiwan. They've had a 60-year worst drought they've had for a long time, which has massively impacted their production capability. They've been shipping by tankers 200,000 tons of water a day to enable the plant to keep going, and clearly it's not working to its full capacity because of this water shortage issue, which has exacerbated all the issues. So if you have a single source major supplier of a component and they're in a country that's at risk of some major climate events, you ought to be thinking of a plan B, and it's not a very secure way to go.
So in terms of supply chain risk, which is just one of the risk elements that we're talking about, but and these are only a couple of the things that can happen in supply chain, so it's touching the surface, but controversial things can happen in supply chain. So we mentioned cotton earlier. Yeah, if your supplier has bad practices or does something, it really can hit your product, hit your reputation, and really impact your business.
Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall is the classic example. If he appears in your doorstep, would you be worried?
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so raw materials as well. Is there anything in your raw material chain? And this is sometimes difficult because you need to know first, second, maybe third tier component parts, but we're more technically connected than we ever were. So it is important. And I think COVID's brought out just how important it is to understand your whole supply chain. Stranded assets is a really interesting one, and it really does. I mean, a classic example is, and I don't know if anyone else, if you felt the same, but the ban on plastic straws happened really quickly. There wasn't any, not like plastic bags, which has been talked about. Straws seem to be eliminated almost overnight. So I think if you're a manufacturer of plastic straws, whether you're on the foot call today, I don't know, but if you are, you may have been left with some really stranded assets overnight. So really it's important to anticipate what's going on in the market and what you possibly could be left with in terms of stranded assets. And
even offices now.
Yeah, well,
lots of people in London, yeah.
Who would have thought, right? I mean, yeah, really fantastic example. But cyber risk as well. Now, we are so interconnected. Our portals, all our systems are interconnected. We need the speed, we need to get to customers, everything is connected. But are you thoroughly protected in terms of your cyber risk? Because a couple of disconnections or some malware on one of those systems, and once again, your business and your supply chain is significantly damaged, and you're losing customers and not providing products and material.
Just to Angela's point there in terms of the business continuity plan, absolutely, and a lot of businesses are actually in relatively good shape on large elements. So typically a business will go in, there'll be 100, 120 different things that they are related to sustainability that they're either doing or could do, and people are often surprised that some of their good business practice is fitting with this agenda. And so business continuity planning is the way to address that. And just the sustainability lens maybe gives a different angle on risks to add to it, but it's all part of good business.
Yeah, totally. So just one example out there recently is coffee shortage. I'm a coffee lover, so that's just a big problem for me. But the world is facing an absolute nightmare in terms of coffee. The droughts in Brazil are depleting all the coffee stocks. It's expected to continue. So Lavazza and they're putting in massive contingency plans. Their safety stocks are all depleted around the world, and containers aren't helping because you can't move things, any stock. The shortage of containers, you can't move the stock around. So yeah, stock up on coffee because it is going to be a problem. And yeah, I mean, it's just also that price sensitivity of people that are highly invested in the coffee industry. What does it mean for them? So really important supply chain risk attached to sustainability.
So in the social areas, we've touched on the diversity, and if you're not addressing it, you should start, and starts with measurement. Health and safety, again, most people in the manufacturing in the UK are all over it, but probably the risk sits in your supply chain and just checking that the right controls are in place there. But inclusivity is a challenge for everyone, and again, our eyes have been opened particularly on people with disabilities, some of the barriers to them. But when you look at that, they represent, so 1 in 7 people in the UK have a disability, and 70% of those disabilities are hidden, and often people aren't aware of those within their workforce, and you've got untapped potential there that you can join with. But also just looking physically, how do you accommodate people to get into your buildings and use them effectively? And well-being, just particularly the mental well-being, if you haven't got a stress risk assessment, it is a legal requirement, so you should have one. But how are you tracking people's well-being, and have you got measures in place that give early warnings that people might have physical or mental well-being issues, and do you signpost them in the right direction? And we love measuring things. Everything we do is geared towards measure it, baseline it, and we would encourage people to measure productivity. But you've got to join these things together, and it's got to work with well-being. And Barclays have made a major blooper where they put a software system in place that monitored people's time at desk, and it actually created a stress issue for the employees. The Information Commissioners got involved, and the GDPR legislation means that they're at risk of a fine of up to 1.1 billion for having put that in badly, which is a massive issue. So you've got to pull these things together and do it for the right reason, with all stakeholders in mind, particularly your employees. So just touching on us and what we offer and how we go around it, we are very much business led. So we don't, whilst we'd love everybody to be as sustainable as they can be tomorrow, it's not possible and practicable for many businesses. And you could go out of business because of the cost disadvantage it would give you. So you need to do the right thing at the right time. So we come from business backgrounds, and very much we encourage people to do as much as they can, but to sustain or increase profit by doing it, and that'll make it stick.
So what do we do? So we do any upfront work. We have a workshop model, and we understand what it's like to be busy business leaders. So we anticipate key areas and design a workshop around your business and your industry. It's interactive for the team. It's a half-day workshop. The session is focused wholly on your business. It's CPD. There's tons of innovation that come out of it, and we are asking you lots of questions about everything. It's usually cross-functional, usually with the SLT or some interested bodies. We give you a report at the end, so we build it into a framework. So all the great things that you're already doing and all the potential opportunities for your business, all linked to a business case, go into a report, which we issue a couple of days after the workshop. And what our customers have really loved the most is a action plan, which is based in the OKR format, and it's your action plan to take, but it gives you the key measures you can start to take. There's no judgment. We hand it over to you, and it just becomes your roadmap for the way forward in terms of, developing and enhancing your sustainability. We then support you with a certification if that's what you need, or just handhold you through the process to become more sustainable. So, and that's across everything, whether it's a measure or rereading some of the work that you've done or supporting some of your team. However, whatever form that comes in, we offer that support. And then we really do not encourage any additional systems or practices. We want this process to be embedded in your system and your normal management reporting. It should just become the language that you talk about, and just run the business as normal. So pick the things that are relevant to you, where you have the big impacts, and we leave you to it. So what our clients say about us is they have been enjoying and saying it's valuable work. We work with a lot of manufacturers, and we really accelerate their sustainability progress. And I think what we find is people hear about us, and then until they get a trigger event, they give us a call. So, and that usually is an investor's asking what they're doing, or usually a key customer is asking what they're doing. And one of our clients has been working in sustainability for a long time, but they genuinely said, we've come further in the last month than we have in 5 years with working with you. So we were thrilled to hear that.
So in terms of the process, and unless this is our specific, how we break it up, it's the same whether you're using a third party or not. It's absolutely establish. Our initial step is the base camp workshop. Where are you now, and what are your measures now? And if you haven't got the measures, get those measures in place. And then our journey stage is around supporting people to set targets and start making them happen so they are genuinely progressing. It's hard to judge people, and we certainly don't score or judge. It's about moving on and establishing that process and being able to demonstrate it in a granular way. And the ultimate for us is Summit, where people decide, actually, we're gonna change the world a bit, we're gonna change our market, and we're totally sustainable. And that is not for everyone, and we wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but it's a lot of fun to be involved with for those people that do, but a bit of a roller coaster. So deliverables that we produce are all geared around helping people take action, helping people clarify where they are and identify the actions and make sure those actions are progressed. And then ultimately for some people, it's around producing those end of year reports and documents that they can share with their customers and key stakeholders. So that is the end of the presentation piece, and we've only had one question through the chat, but I guess if we stop sharing, are there any other questions, or has anyone got any thoughts or comments? Is everyone still here?
Awake?
Yeah, I've got a comment. I was at a conference earlier this week on research and development and innovation. And there's a very interesting guy from Holland talking about carpets and mattresses, of all things. And what he was saying, the point he was really making about carpets was that used carpets all go to landfill at the moment. And a massive contribution to landfill, apparently. But that's because they can't be reprocessed. So they started off by redesigning the carpet. So there are currently 17 components going to a carpet. So you got this down to two that could be recycled. All right, so that's your research and development, your innovation, but then you have to go to a manufacturer. You have to persuade the manufacturer that, look, he needs to actually start doing something different. But of course, this needs new plant and equipment. So you then have to go to a plant manufacturer to say, can you make me this kit? Do you already have it? So, excuse me, and then you've got to persuade the manufacturer, oh yeah, he's going to make it because he's got a market to sustain. So he's then going to distribute that into the market. So the distributors you've got have got to persuade you that this is a good idea. And the whole process it was talking about was, how can we get that material that we use initially back as feedstock into the process? And the point he's really making is it's an alliance in those situations. So it's not down to one individual businesses. So if you're in the carpet industry, not that I don't know we've got much carpet industry left in this country, but if you were in that carpet industry, then it's a whole alliance that needs to be put together. And they did exactly the same with mattresses. And they went through that whole process so that the mattresses that were used were the feedstock for new mattresses. And again, it's the same situation. It's about having an alliance. And one of the things that dawned on me out of this was that obviously if you're supplying carpets into offices and hotels and mattresses, you can then servitize the whole thing as well. So you're not actually buying it, you're paying for a service of it. But so I think in many instances, it's about alliances that you need to create, and so it's about the associations needs to drive this. Individual businesses could do tons, but there's a limit to what they can do. I mean, I can invent something, but persuading the other people in that chain is a different matter.
That's a really good point. And one of the key goals on the agenda is actually partnerships. And it touches on all the different aspects, because exactly the point you make, to do it on your own so hard, but also the government angle. That's where legislation can help in terms of leveling the playing field. So a ban on landfill massive consequences for all sectors, but it would force people to put an end date on when that process would happen. So partnerships for all these things, I think, absolutely bang on.
But I think I know there's an example of Ren Skincare, which is a luxury skincare product, and they're collaborating with their other luxury skincare companies to reduce the luxury product, because when you get a skincare, it comes in a plastic, and then it's in a box, and then it's wrapped in more plastic, and they're trying to level the playing field in their market. I mean, and you have to be a brave and bold business to start sharing with competitors, really, but it's got to start somewhere, and hopefully that gives those players in that consortium a competitive edge against perhaps people that aren't in it, because they're making inroads. So yeah, it's my favorite topic, actually, is the partnership angle.
I put a post on LinkedIn before Christmas last year. My youngest daughter wanted to know why there weren't any manufacturers who made sustainable or reusable wrapping paper, gift wrapping paper.
Yeah.
And she looked everywhere, and there's just that you just cannot get it, or if you can, it's incredibly expensive. Think how much gift wrapping paper we use each year, particularly at Christmas time. But I guess until there's more demand, or until people start to demand it, manufacturers are not going to really change their way of making it.
Well, that's where stranded assets kick in again.
Yeah. Oh, plastic straws is a good example. Who would have thought? That's an amazing example that,
Roy had something to say there.
Yeah, I think it's to do with wrapping paper. As soon as they put some sparkly stuff on it, that actually contaminates the pulping process, and that becomes a problem. So we need to actually change our consumption if we're going to have recycling. So we've got to change it in some way. And if you bring it back to that carpet, you need to redesign that wrapping paper from the bottom up so that it has a minimum number of components, and all those components are actually recyclable.
But this is where consumer pressure kicks in, because there is actually a movement and a trend towards giving gifts in brown paper, just basic paper. So actually the suppliers of the decorative stuff risk just being bypassed completely, and therefore their market's just gone very quickly. It would only take Hugh to come back into life and say everybody should be using newspaper to give presents, and if it takes off.
But it is a strategy to have an isolated channel. So the guys that are making all the nice sparkly paper could also do a recycled range and test the water, like some of the clothing manufacturers do with their sustainable product ranges. It's another strategy.
We have a question on the chat box from Serene. How do you advise your clients to implement gender diversity if the industry is male dominated?
So well, this plays back to the partnership piece as well. So number one is to what else is being done in your sector. Have a look outside your pool and look in other sectors that have successfully made the transition, and what have they done. But you have to start with measuring where you are and measuring where your sector is. So if there are sector bodies, I would encourage you to speak to the sector body and find out what they've done, and do they have measures. If they haven't got a measure, establish the base mark for the sector, but then look at where are you recruiting, where have people come from, and it's an on and on and on piece. But the benchmarking piece is really important, because it's hard to buck the trend in your sector, but there are some industries that have been really successful in addressing gender diversity, so look at what they've done.
Back to partnerships as well. A lot of companies are, especially with the male dominated industry, maybe construction, are partnering with universities and getting, or some of the feeder groups to get out there and be a leader in a diversity sort of arena. So there's some good examples of that.
But also recognize it's a long game. So you aren't going to turn it around overnight. You aren't going to get diversity in your leadership if you haven't got diversity in your employee base, and it does take time. So a lot of people are setting targets for 2030, which will encourage them to move the dial, but they're ambitious 2030 targets. At one business that's got 10% gender equality now, and they've set themselves a 40% target by 2030. and they're reporting that year on year. So they do need to move the dial, but it's a sensible time frame, because you need to build it through, and you aren't going to start sacking people and just changing things overnight.
John's had his hand up. He's got a question to ask.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Just wondering if you are seeing yet an impact on company valuations that are appearing as a result of the efforts in sustainability. So, you know, one of the things I do is work on company valuations and with owners on a path to increase the value of the companies. And there's still a lot of traditional financial metrics used for that, but increasingly I'm trying to encourage a conversation about the value from a sustainable approach to business and leadership, and that having an impact on the value of your company. So I don't know if you're seeing anything like that yet, or something could be considered as a way of you know, viewing your valuation multiple of the business with an impact of your sustainability standing. Are you seeing anything like that happening so far?
So the not directly with the companies we've been working with, you may have come across Ørsted. It was a major energy provider who were entirely carbon based about 10 years ago, and they're now something like 97% on renewables, and their valuation is significantly higher than many other energy businesses. It sort of sits out on its own. There's a company in Italy that's got a similar mix of energy. It's got a much lower valuation, just because they've been seen to be leading the way on this, and they're perceived to be not just low carbon now, but they're perceived to be innovative and progressive on the front. So whether it's a good valuation or not,
I suggest that there, you know, there's an opportunity there to look at how, because, you know, at the end of the day, brilliant. I love the way you looked at the customer drivers, the client, the customer churn, etc. And by the way, just as a comment, whether it's 20% in customer numbers or 20% in value, I don't know. But just looking at the chart you have there, the bigger business you start focusing on, the customer churn numbers will not be as good as that. You know, businesses with 20% churn are actually, I've seen a lot worse. So the case for acting will only get bigger, because I think that's quite a kind of a good achievement to be around 20 is not so bad, right? But the idea of having a key or a value driver for the business owners that actually enhances the value of their business, or the premium they'll get, either in passing it on or selling it, I think could be a really worthwhile angle to add to it, because you've got a baseline in the work you're doing, and somehow putting some crystallization of value around that might actually be you know, motivate people and move people a bit quicker. Right?
We do see more customers that are looking for investment from the city and investment from impact funds. We are seeing a lot more. They want to prove that they're sustainable to attract that investment. So there's definitely an interest on that level, and reducing their risk, you know, understanding their risk on that side.
and even access to any funds. So the main street banks now are all under pressure to reduce they use the phrase financed emissions. So they are actually looking at what are the ESG credentials of the customers they're even given an overdraft to, and they're under increasing pressure to enhance how they do that. It's very superficial at the minute, but that's another point. So the whole investment world, lots of funds now are saying, if it's not ESG credible, I don't want my money going in it, which has driven lots of indices. But it's a bit like the Wild West right now. The number of indices that are out there and the different ways they measure it are vast.
One last remark around the leadership side of it, because I think a lot of the dimensions regarding the diversity, working to the community, the wider lens you have on your framework, a lot of that will have to be driven by a different leadership perspective and a different leadership style. And again, maybe that's an opportunity for you to start building a kind of module around sustainable leadership and what that should be, and how that needs to be somehow different.
I'll take your note, John. Thanks.
Yeah, great, John.
Michael's been wanting to ask a question.
Sorry, Adam's got his hand up.
I don't mind who goes first. Doesn't matter.
Adam, you go first. You're better looking than I am.
I don't know about that. Mine was a number of things, really. We spoke around leadership. In the manufacturing industry, we suffer from the accidental manager. So we haven't trained or inbuilt the training that is needed for the different levels. And that's right up to some of the CEO levels as well, in my opinion. I'm an ex-senior executive within private equity, and I've seen some of the behaviours at very high levels working with my international capital 9 billion portfolio, shocking. So there's training and awareness that needs to be done from that. We then have the other side as well, is that we look at the SME base. The SME base is probably, I don't know what it is, 95% of the manufacturing base is made up of SMEs. Most of those SMEs are lifestyle businesses. So what sort of skin in the game do they particularly have? Because they are quite happy with the lifestyle that they have and not interested in doing anything else, So we've got another issue there. So it is, there is a hell of a lot to go at, and it's a massive opportunity. And I know, Luke, we've had discussions on this in the manufacturing hour, haven't we? And it's an interesting one way to go, and it's how we actually flick the buttons. And I think we've got multiple messages, multiple awareness levels to hit on all of those channels. One message is not going to do it all, because we're at a different customer journey or value journey in each one. Now, how we align that and how we collectively do that is part of the rub as well for me. But yeah, that was just my
good point.
Thank you, Michael, by the way. I'll hand it over to the better looking one now.
We don't score.
Do you guys want to come back on that, or
No.
Go for it. Right. Okay. I was going to make a point about sustainability from a product point of view, but I just wanted to pick up on the gender thing. There was a really interesting conversation that I was involved with about diversity, and there was a guy from an ethnic background. So I don't want a job because of my background. I want a job because I'm the best guy for the job, which is a really interesting one, this positive. But equally, one of the women that was on the the conversation actually said, you need to think about how you word job adverts, because actually, and talk about your business, because just because you say we are an equal opportunities employer doesn't mean that you're an equal opportunities employer, but actually speaking in a certain language will encourage the applications from females, perhaps more females, who were discouraged by the language that they see in the job advert, which I thought was a really interesting insight just from my point of view. Just from a sustainability of products point of view, I did an exercise with one of my clients and we looked at it, and it was, and not being from a sustainability background, you go into it, it was absolutely gobsmacking to me that when we put the level of initiatives together, and we looked at what the costs and the implications of doing this program was, that we're actually, that should save us money, that should save us money, that should save. And somebody said at the end of this, if you're doing lots of initiatives that have the word reduce the amount of plastic packaging, reduce the amount of this. And maybe I was being a little bit thick, but I thought it was really interesting to go through the process. And actually, even where we might have had to do some investment in some research into how our products might be recycled, etc., end of life or whatever it was, at the end of the day, these could still be cost positive at the end of the day. So I thought that was a really fascinating message. And last thing I wanted to say is that we have to give consumers a choice, and we have to give them a choice which is friction free, because everybody will choose the better option, provided there isn't a massive difference in cost. I'd love a hybrid or electric car. Last time I looked, when I changed my car, £10,000 was the difference between the two things. So there's a thing there. And I will choose sustainable, or I will choose recycled, or I will choose this, right up to the point when it's not available and I need it now, and I can't, and I'll go for the bad old version of a cleaning product or whatever, because my recycled one's not available. So, we can't criticize consumers if we don't make these things available. And I think we always think that it's the consumer's fault, but we need to make sure that we give them a choice. So that was just my observations from today, and I will now shut up and we'll find somebody even better to do the next comment. Oh, Luke's stepping to the point now. He's had a haircut. Nice to see you, Luke.
Yeah, cheers, Michael. Thank you. A while ago, actually. I think Tolu's got his hand up. Tolu.
Yeah, hi everyone. That was a really brilliant presentation, especially because sustainability is something that is like passionate about, because I really thought about it, because we don't have another Earth, And we're not all Elon Musk that if this earth gets ruined, where are we going? You feel me? So, and then on the point of partnerships, that really resonated with me because at Connex, that's what we're about. We're about creating relationships and growing partnerships and collaborations and all of that. So I was just curious, how do you go about like creating these partnerships, and then what challenges have you encountered so far?
It's a good question. So we don't. So it's encouraging the clients to do. So where we start is actually what partnerships have they already got, and we classify them. And it's an interesting exercise for people because when they look at it and they talk about, yeah, we are so environmental, and you look at their partnerships and there's none of them are environmental related, but you look maybe at the social things they're doing and massive. And when they look at that and look at where the opportunity time of those partnerships is, they often think about shifting their focus to the areas where they are making a big impact or want to make more of an impact. So there's only so much management time available. You need to maximize that. So we encourage them to, okay, so what partnerships are available in your industry or in the area that you're interested in? And strategically, what makes most sense to help you move the dial on your impacts? And then who in your business is going to own that partnership? And what are you looking to get out of it? Are there any metrics? What dial in your business are you looking to move through being in that partnership? And that causes people, because we've seen people with rafts of partnerships and the time they spend on it with very little value or outcome. So really focus on where you can make a difference.
Super. And then Mark Wood's got a question.
Hi, good morning. I've put my camera on. I've tried to save you the awfulness of looking at the state of me this morning. So Rondi, it was good to talk to you again the other day. We had a great chat. I think it's really interesting if I pull together a few of the statements and comments and opportunities that exist. I'll quite hinge it around a case study, if you like. And some of this comes down to leadership, which goes back to Adam's point. And hi, Adam, great to see you again. So we worked with a client of ours sort of 18 months ago to de-risk their supply chain. And they were in a situation whereby they'd got a single source supplier who was at high risk, and their consistent inability to perform was putting their own brand at risk and putting their customer at risk. So they're starting to get a bit of love. So we did an exercise in terms of working with them to identify alternative suppliers, but not just going, can we find another supplier that does the same, but it's also about actually the sustainability agenda and that detailed requirements of, have you got X, Y, and Z, including things like an environmental policy. And what's really important as well is putting those frameworks in place. Don't do a desktop exercise. Actually get off your backside and go and see people and understand their working practices and cultures as well. What was actually really interesting within all of that, one company owner was 8 years old, slapped down in front of me an environmental policy that he'd made up the night before, just so he could get through the process. So needless to say, I had a bit of sport with that in terms of challenging him. So how does he think that now he has any credibility? But it was also highlighting that the lack of leadership within his business, which is a lifestyle business to Adam's point earlier on, was fundamentally lacking. And we had a conversation for an hour, let's say, about why we think a company might want an environmental policy and why they might want to flow that down into their supply chain and the impact of the environment. And quite frankly, he just didn't get it. Now, we might have a lifestyle business and they might have some value in that business. And I've just left him with, in 4 years' time, you will not have a business. Your choice. And I think that's symptomatic of the challenge that is there for SMEs and the people within and leading those SMEs, but also the impact that it can have in your business if you don't jump on the onto the agenda very quickly.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Yeah. We would agree.
Yeah, I know you do. That's why I said it. sort of spreading the love.
Yeah.
I've got a question. So the net zero target, 2050 target, how likely do you think industry is of achieving that? Bear in mind of what Mark's just brought up, and again Adam brought up about sort of 95% of manufacturers are SMEs. They haven't got a reason. Is it over ambitious?
So I say no. I think yes, because the money, the funds, and the world follows where people put their money. They're demanding it. It's on their agenda. It's not coming off their agenda. So they are going to push people. And if you don't react, someone else will. And to Mark's point, you'll be out of business. So
Yeah.
I'm very optimistic that actually once the money gets involved, that really makes it happen.
And I think, I mean, just if you use the plastic tax as a good example, there will be a regulation on carbon. It's coming. There will be consistent measures. There's no doubt about it. So, and there'll be all the other regulations coming. So that this is not going away.
So I think carbon tax.
Can I just add to that as well? So I've got a real life case study right now, and it's something I really shouldn't be involved in at all. And it's typical of what can happen to an organisation. So at the minute, my daughter's school informed all of the parents last week that it's going out of business. It's an independent school, and they informed everybody at the end of this term, that's it, we won't be here. And they're going into insolvency. I've been part of a cohort of parents trying to sort that out and see if we can come up with a rescue package. And I think we have. I think we've run out of time, but that's a different story. The key bit within it all, if you have a look at it, this hasn't happened overnight. As a school, stroke business, that over the last 4 or 5 years, they've failed to innovate. They've failed to keep up with the times. They've failed to keep up with market expectations, and their pupil numbers have dropped significantly to the point now where it is not sustainable going forward. And that's a real life example of if you don't innovate, if you don't do and meet what the customers are demanding, and ultimately sort of the insurance houses and that going forward, you will go out of business. It's happening now.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, so we've got money getting pushed through, we've got demand from customers, is the 2050 under ambitious? Because at the end of the day, people only react at a need. Is 2050 too far away to people care about it?
I can't answer that.
But my real life example is the plastic tax. There's not very much noise out there about it, which is surprising. Okay, so it's coming in April 2022. You don't really see much about it. You don't see much preparation for it or thinking about it. But corporates, the big guys, are on it, and it is a significant it's having a significant impact in FMCG, and I know they're working on it, and the value of tax that they're going to pay is quite significant for them, and they're big. So where that is going to flow into the supply chain and anybody providing those businesses, it is going to be an instantaneous negative impact. I think this is happening in April. So in terms of the question, I suppose, is I think people need to be working on carbon because the government will implement a carbon tax or something quickly, and it won't be an easy fix. So I don't know if it's over ambitious or under ambitious, but it is definitely going to be something it's on the agenda.
And in terms of the scale of the challenge, it is massive, 50 billion tons of carbon, and through COVID it was reduced by 3 billion, and we all shut down. So that's a lot to shift, and people look at offsetting and the amount of net zero commitments there isn't enough offsetting available to let people do it now. It's not physically possible. So that whole offsetting industry needs to scale significantly, because we will still create carbon. We can't get rid of it completely, and we've got to be able to offset or remove carbon from the atmosphere. Net zero is removing, it's not carbon neutral. You actually have to take it out. So it's a big ask.
Yeah. So, sorry, we've got two questions. Sorry, Roy had his hand up first, Adam, if that's all right. We'll do Roy, and then we'll do Roy, then we'll do Adam, and then we'll sort of wrap it up, I think.
I think we need to look at the instance of Shell in the Netherlands, where the court said, No, it's not good enough for you just to meet and follow industry generally and follow the trend. You've got to do it by a certain date. And maybe there'll be more of that coming along. And so that's one point. But the other bit in the news recently was about Volvo and green steel, that from now on they will make it all from green. And that immediately has a knock-on effect, because of course those kind of companies also have lots of SMEs that supply into
Yeah,
it, you know.
definitely.
And so there's a couple of interesting things going on there. So it needs to be more ambitious. You know, I don't think it's ambitious enough, but it can be made more ambitious if things like the courts get very active and some of the big players in the field say, no, this is where we're going, you've got to follow.
Agreed.
Perfect. Go on, Adam.
There is, so I'm going to play devil's advocate here because I like doing that, you know I do, and from both sides from that point of view. 2050, is it ambitious, not ambitious enough? I don't know. I can't answer that, because anything from a forecasting point of view that far out is like, I don't know, pissing in the wind probably, you know, excuse my language. The side of it for me is that we've got to think, we've got the big business and the corporates are on it, but they're supplied by SMEs, and the SME base is the far greater base. So, okay, great, you're a big business. I don't give a flying two hoots how big you are, because you're supplied by the SME base. So if we're going to change anything, we could put the bring it forward like 2030, you know, and put the pressure on, but we have to have a strategic alignment around how we do it, and it has to be led and communicated across the base. Otherwise, we've seen the situation with Brexit. Everybody left it to the last minute. We knew it was coming, but everybody left it to the last minute.
Yeah.
And we'll have exactly the same here. Now then, the big issue then is not like Brexit, well, potentially, is you will have businesses and unemployment, because they won't no longer be able to survive. And that's the bigger challenge, because it'd be like that. So there is a leading factor that needs to happen, and there needs to, and Luke, we know, because we've been on the manufacturing TV side for how long now, and discussing around the industrial strategy. They got rid of that when we interviewed, was it Vince Cable back in January, I think it was February, that the government took over that, and nothing's replaced it, the industrial strategy, and that needs to happen. We need to have, I think somebody put up on LinkedIn, a minister of manufacturing per se in the country, that is actually bringing all of these federations, organizations. We have all these membership groups, we have all of them. You know me, you'll get me on a rant on this, Luke, you know me around this. We have all these membership organizations, we have all these institutes. They need to come together as one voice, one led by the Ministry of Manufacturing, or whatever you know, however you want to do it, the Minister of Manufacturing. So the thing is you can do it. We've proven it through manufacturing with COVID. When we put our minds to it, we can achieve. But it's that one focal point that happens. We knew that it was COVID and we've got to deal with it. Now it's sustainability. We've got to deal with it. And we need to put it on the agenda, far more on the agenda more. But that was my 2 pence on it. I think, and some of it is, we create a CRM database. If somebody unsubscribes from your database, that's filtered your database. If these businesses go under, perhaps it's they should, because we've filtered what we need to filter. It's horrible to say, but it's filtered it, and that's probably what needs to happen. We get rid of the I don't know what we call them, hangers on. I don't know. You know, it filters and we become stronger for it. That's just my view. Yeah,
no, I agree. I think we need someone at the top to sort of start making decisions and start sort of making those difficult decisions. Just open the floor. Has anyone got any more questions or anything more comments they'd like to say? Perfect. Right. Well, thanks very much for coming on this morning. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I hope you found it informative, and hopefully the more people sort of turn on to sustainability, it will actually make a difference, and 2050 will be not a pipe dream. So thanks a lot, guys.
And thanks
you,
for
everyone.
having us, Luke, and thanks
thank you,
everybody for
Luke.
joining us. Nice to meet you all.